Everything in a movie is a special effect.
As far as I can tell, visual effects aren't going away.
Imagine being able to go from daytime to nighttime at the touch of a button.
Anybody can make a film. Probably one of the best things they could do your own film.
That was my first day as a grown-up DP on a feature film.
Trial by fire.
Yeah, absolutely.
Welcome to another installment of the Digital Cinema Show, a series covering the art, science, and business of motion pictures. In light of several sequels and re-releases of pioneering classic visual effects features such as Blade Runner and Close Encounters of the Third Kind, we thought it might be a good time to dig into the subject of visual effects. Our guests include visual effects pioneer Douglas Trumbull, who will share some remembrances from the original Blade Runner. We also hear from renowned director, cinematographer, visual effects producer, and CEO of Stargate Films, Sam Nicholson, ASC. He speaks to the importance of matching lighting for green screen compositing and shows us some of his award-winning work, which he refers to as the virtual backlot. Paul Kobelja of VER gives us a little historical perspective on the world of visual effects and describes an alternative to the use of green screen known as the Enhanced Environments System. David Hardberger is a visual effects cinematographer. He worked on such notable films as the Lord of the Rings trilogy and selections in both the Star Wars and Star Trek motion picture series. He started out in the camera department as an AC on Close Encounters. Here he gives some advice for those aspiring to join the field of visual effects filmmaking. And finally, Stephen Poster, ASC, a renowned cinematographer in his own right, in addition to serving as the president of the ICG, reminisces about his early days as a second unit DP. He worked on both Close Encounters of the Third Kind and Blade Runner, under ASC cinematographers Vilmos Zsigmond and Jordan Cronenweth, in addition to directors Steven Spielberg and Ridley Scott. We could not provide this content without the continued support of our sponsors, and in particular Panasonic, who bring us the Vericam family of digital cinema cameras, including the new EVA-1. It's a 5.7K handheld cinema camera with dual native ISOs of 800 and 2500 and records to low-cost SD cards with 14 plus stops of dynamic range. We begin with Paul Kobelja of VER.
I'm actually going to be giving you kind of, cliff notes on the history of visual effects, but this is our handy color-coded history of visual effects chart that kind of, places into context, how we got to what it is that we're doing. Motion picture as an industry is 100 years old. 100 years ago, 19th century illusionists found that they could actually get involved in this new thing called cinema and actually begin doing something that they had been doing, in the 19th century, which essentially was to place characters on a stage inside of an environment that would ostensibly inform or fool the audience into thinking that those people were somewhere that you couldn't possibly be. These fantastic environments, have gotten to be, really quite amazing, quite effective, as we can see from Avatar. But over the last 30 years, our working environment has come to look more and more like this. This kind of very antiseptic world, this green world where an actor, has to, essentially act and react to a world that's going to be painted in later. And so what we started working on 6 years ago was a way to look back into the history of creating these environments and to I guess, reach a medium ground, where we could actually have the environment around the actors or the talent that's working. And so we began working on what we called enhanced environments. And so that actually began about 6 years ago. First movie I did was Iron Man 2. I don't know if you guys remember that giant scene where they had the trade show and they had that huge screen behind Tony Stark. Well, that originally was supposed to be a green screen. And what was very interesting about that is, the film came to me and they said, do you have, something, projection or something like that we can use instead of a green screen? And I said, well, isn't the standard process to go with the green screen? They said, well, actually the reflections in the floor are going to make that, a very expensive thing for us to do, and we were wondering if there's a way we could do that live. And so that was the first large installation of an LED screen on a motion picture. And since that time, we've adapted it to a number of different, processes. And so enhanced environments actually began with what we called vehicular amplification, which is really old poor man's process. The whole idea is take a static process and then make it look like it's moving. Hey, Phil, can you go ahead and bring that up? And so you can see we have a live shot here. And so the whole idea is that what we have done is we have a person, our model, sitting in the car right here, and we have surrounded her with live imagery taken in Las Vegas. But the real sell in a lot of this, there are a number of different things that you don't normally get when you've got, poor man's process without some kind of live imagery here. So the first thing I'll point out is the reflections on the windshield in front of her face. All of that, that's obscuring her face between the camera and so on. The lighting that you will see once the cars start moving again up here in the ceiling, this whole effect of light moving across these surfaces inside the car. These are all things that with a standard, green screen background and poor man's process, that's all just tiny little indicators of reality that you don't normally get inside of a green screen environment. Can you roll the window down? There we go. And so you can see, that even as the light is playing across her face, that we are getting a very, very real, a very, very effective, driving shot here. All of this is live. We have nothing that we're having to do in post. We're not having to bring a green screen shot into post. And it's really quite effective. Very inexpensive in relation to going on a poor man's process, and in many cases very inexpensive in relation to doing this, with green screen. And so eventually somebody came to me and said, well, what if we really wanted to surround something quite a bit larger than a car? And that actually led to what we did on a movie called Oblivion. So set extension or a dioramic effect, the whole idea of actually placing your entire scene inside of an artificial world. So same problem they had here. If you look at that, that is actually an uncorrected photograph taken from the set. That's a live projected image around that set. And the big benefit from that is if you look at the reflections in the surface going all the way out to that ship, it really looks like you're there. Those reflections are a huge part of really placing characters inside of an environment. And so they came to me and they said, well, this is our set, and we need to surround this with live imagery. And they presented me with, this file right here that we've animated, saying, so we were going to surround this with a green screen. But that green screen then was going to create reflections throughout that entire house because that house was nothing but glass and marble, the whole thing. And so we began testing LED first. LED was not workable, so that that screen is 45 feet high and 570 feet around. So what we eventually had to do is we had to deploy 22 projectors to stitch an image, a single image together. The images were actually rotated sideways this way so that we could take advantage of the 1920 for our height, and then they were edge blended top to bottom all the way around. And so by the end of it, the actual image that was on that screen surrounding that house was 1920 high by 28K all the way around.
Before the movie started principal photography, we went to Haleakala, a volcano in Maui. We set up 3 cameras that captured sky, cloud, sunrise, sunsets, stars. Then we took that footage and we front projected it on a massive screen that surrounded the set.
There is no blue screen. I mean, what you're seeing is the final product.
And we're able to, change the weather. It's sunset, and next day is daylight, and we have night, and all the clouds are moving. It's all pretty amazing.
And what that allowed us to do is to not only capture it in camera, but use the reflected light of that footage to actually light the sets and the actors.
The lighting that you're getting on the actors' faces is the same type of light they get in a sunset because it's literally footage of a sunset.
You end up with an all-in-camera visual effect and a visual quality that just can't be faked.
So some of the things they didn't really touch on there that are important to note. There was lighting inside that set, but it was very minimal lighting that was actually built into the set itself. There were LED lights built into the ceiling and so on, but the majority of the lighting that you see in those shots, all of that is the interactive light that's actually coming off the imagery on the screens. So it's essentially allowing filmmakers to function without having to do a lot of additional lighting, and they really didn't. It allowed them to point the camera in any direction. It allowed them to work really very quickly. Imagine being able to go from daytime to nighttime at the touch of a button. No waiting, no going to splits, no night shoots. It's all done for you. So the other side effect of this that we actually discovered that was really quite, a benefit is fully interactive lighting. The whole concept that you could actually surround somebody with a projected image, and you could use it not only as something on camera, but you could also use it as fully interactive lighting. And so the next big project that I did with that type of thing was a movie called Tomorrowland. And so I don't have a lot of footage to show you, but I can show you the footage that we shot when we were still loading the system in. It was really quite large. But what's very interesting is you can see the imagery moving across these screens, but it was not designed for any of that imagery to appear on the movie. This was actually designed as a fully interactive surround lighting system, to create this effect of being able to fly through all of these different environments with, quick changes of direction because of this time machine that they were in. And it was really quite effective, and it was, taking, it's a very large, version of something that was kind of a side effect of doing these enhanced environments.
Sam Nicholson, ASC, is a visual effects producer, director, and cinematographer who began his career on the Star Trek movies. He is also the founder and CEO of leading visual effects house Stargate Studios and a two-time Emmy winner.
Using light in visual effects and cinematography and combining them with visual effects in such a way that as a cinematographer, if you know what the effect is going to be, then you should know how to light it. And we've taken that all the way forward to creating fusion of live action and both virtual spaces and real spaces, what we call the virtual backlot. And you really have to be able to recreate natural light in such a way that it's indistinguishable from real daylight. Or
So you have to have a lot of interactive light to sell.
Yeah, I think, the interactive part of it, I always think the light should move. If you look outside, if you drive in a car, if you walk underneath trees, whatever, it's out there, the light is really kinetic and really interactive. On a stage, it's generally pretty dead. They put the lights up, they put the actors in, and you roll. And so if you're doing like a driving scene or something, it's a killer, because if you don't move the light and if you don't analyze the light and recreate, a kinetic lighting system on stage for street lights to go over, or for a bright building to go by, or whatever, your light is dead. It's just flat as a rock. And then we put in visual effects a very active background, like Times Square or something there, and there's no interactive light, there's no reactive, and it looks dead. It doesn't look right. So the difference between a cinematographer who really knows how and really thinks how to get creative with lighting makes a huge difference in the end product. And that's why I think all the new developments in light make it that much easier. I've picked this reel because it's shooting for virtual. So these are virtual fusions where the lighting has to be perfect between the live action and reality and what you're going to put in. So in this case, this is a computer-generated set. In this case, we shot Rome first and then shot the actors to match. In this case, we generally try to shoot the backgrounds first and then mimic the lighting on the actors. It allows you to shoot in a lot of places like DC where we're giving that grip a workout in the background. More and more we're blending 3D spaces with real cinematography for the environments and then cutting way down and seamlessly transitioning between them. This is shooting plates in Moscow and then shooting the actors in Montreal to match. This is a nice one to put people at Gino's Pizza. But doing this, you don't have to leave the backlot. And it allows, particularly for television production, it allows you to go to a lot of places that normally they wouldn't be able to afford. So it opens up a lot of creative possibilities for the writers, like writing into Grand Station, Central Station. This is a virtual set, no walls. Did this in Cairo, pretty difficult conditions with all tungsten light, very hot. This is in Malta. I love this. They didn't even give her a desk, so they gave her a cardboard box. So you can clearly save some money. This is in Spain. Very successful show, El Príncipe in Spain. This was Pan Am, shot in New York.
You won an Emmy for that one.
Yeah, we did. This was shot 5 years previous. I shot the Thames, and then NCIS wanted to do a scene on the Thames, so we pulled it up. This is kind of how to do a virtual stadium. This is all Grey's Anatomy now. There's no real helicopters. And they've gotten very good at it over the years. This is, a 180 pan. So this is spherical. This is like see, that's a 180 pan, so you're in a sphere. So we shoot like virtual reality. We've got teams out all around, and the idea is to blend reality with green screen, virtual, whatever. I mean, I like to try to make as much of it real as possible. And I think by shooting the plates first, the best education for a cinematographer you can possibly have is what's happening right outside. To try to recreate daylight on stage is really tough. And the sharpness of the shadows, everything. It's the bounce light, all the stuff, the big blue sky up there, all that stuff has to be taken into account. And if you're just doing a shot of trying to create daylight without seeing daylight right behind us, it's when you put the real daylight behind us that you go, well, there's something wrong with their lighting. Without that, it's a backing, it's a whatever, it's okay, because it's, so, I think what I like to do is sit in a car driving or whatever and really try to analyze the light. So what we did this at AFI with Bob Primes. It was very successful. You do it with a still camera, and you go anywhere, Griffith Park, anywhere, and shoot a couple people, and I shoot a picture of you in front of something, and then you step out, and I shoot the empty background. Then we both go on to a green screen stage, and I try to recreate the light exactly the way you were lit. Now, I have you in both places, and it's amazing how fast you can get there if you do that. If you have a subject, when you're shooting the plates, drop a subject in.
Just leave a stand-in or whatever.
A stand-in, ideally, it's somebody who'll be with you when you shoot the green screen, because you got the same model. And then you're just matching lighting. And matching lighting is a lot easier than just trying to come up with it. I think one of the things we're doing now is when we shoot, even on stage, we shoot with a Theta or a 360 spherical camera, which will hit every one of these lights. It'll hit everything. It shows the negative bounce behind you. It shows the space light up here, it's a little bit of blue over here.
And the exact angle.
It gives you a 360-degree map of the lighting in this room. So now you've got that, and you can recreate it. I can actually go into another stage with a 360 virtual map and recreate this because I can see everything. So I think having a much better understanding of volumetric lighting is really critical for the DPs. And as far as I can tell, visual effects aren't going away. We're having to deal with them more and more and more because every producer, well, we'll shoot here and I want you to take those telephone poles out, or I want you to add those telephone poles, or I want to be at the beach, I want to be, whatever. And so having a good relationship with visual effects supervisors, people, is really important. But also, I think that the cinematographer can teach the visual effects people how to light.
David Hardberger, visual effects cinematographer on such notable films as the Lord of the Rings trilogy and selections in the Star Wars and Star Trek motion picture series, started out as an AC on Close Encounters. He gives some practical advice to those aspiring to become VFX professionals today. Now that was shot 35 millimeter,
Yes.
and Peter Jackson since moved on to shooting digital, and now I'm sure you're shooting digital sometimes.
I'm shooting more.
Differences?
There's still an organic quality to film that digital hasn't quite mastered, although there's enough filters they can put in post to give it a film look.
But from a visual effects perspective, since they always use that as an excuse of why you might shoot digital because of effects, so you don't have to do the registration passes and all that.
Yes.
Does it make your life easier?
On my end, it doesn't. It
That's
doesn't
not
make it
much difference.
one way or the other. No, it's because it's all going to get handed off at some point. So once it's off the stage, it doesn't make my life easier one way or the other.
So it doesn't matter to you much if it's film or digital, but how has digital technology changed your work in visual effects?
Ooh.
As far as it's all computer driven, when you first started doing visual effects, it was more mechanical.
It was all photochemical.
Yeah.
It was all mechanical. We did have something on the motion control unit that we referred to as a computer. It really wasn't. It was basically just a giant recorder that would record all the camera
movement.
axes and then be able to play them back. So in that regard, that's changed.
Do you have any advice for aspiring filmmakers who might like to follow in your footsteps?
I think it's harder for people to get into the industry now. I really do, because I've talked to a lot of younger people, and it's a struggle. And I don't know how to get experience, because when I made the jump from cartoons and the commercial house over to features, there was like a handful of people doing this. So we were like first in the door. Now everybody's in the door. It's easier for people to do films. It's a lot easier. Technology's there. The editing systems, you can do them at home. The After Effects, same thing. You can do half of this stuff out of your house. And so anybody can make a film. Probably one of the best things they could do your own film. Make your own film, because believe me, you will make a lot of mistakes.
That's what I love about this
helps.
business, is that there's always more to learn.
Yes.
You never know it all.
And that's part of the thing that's part of the reason I like it. It's always a new game. You go on to the next show and it's going to be not exactly the same as, or sometimes it's radically different than what you just experienced or have experienced.
Stephen Poster, ASC, is the acclaimed cinematographer of indie hits like Donnie Darko and Southland Tales to major studio features like Rocky V, Big Top Pee-wee, Stuart Little 2, and Someone to Watch Over Me. He is a past president of the ASC and currently serves as president of the International Cinematographers Guild. We talked with him about his early career with supporting cinematography work on such classics as Blade Runner and Close Encounters of the Third Kind.
Creighton put me together with Vilmos to go to Mobile to do Close Encounters, and that was a big break for me. It was a huge break.
Can you tell us about what it was like working with the late great Vilmos Zsigmond?
He was, first of all, always a true gentleman. I mean, he was a sweet and wonderful guy who was passionate about what he did, but Vilmos had an ability to kind of, in the face of anything, put his head down and go forward, no matter what happened. And believe me, there was 5 times that he was threatened to be fired on that movie, and 5 times that he might have been threatened, but in our community at that point, nobody would take over for him. So he kept to come back the next day, and he never let that affect him. He just went forward, and it was a great lesson to really understand perseverance and what it takes in this business to succeed. But every time they were in trouble for money or whatever, they would blame it on him, and he would get fired, and he'd come back the next day. It was truly delightful. The first few weeks I was there, because it was 14 weeks. The first few weeks I was there, Spielberg would not let me touch a camera. I was the Chicago guy, go sit in a corner. And finally we were doing the party scene in the backyard, the suburban party scene in the backyard. And Stephen came up to me and said, all right, go take a camera and an assistant, go show me what you can do. Get me some stuff from this party. And a few days later, on a Friday, I'll never forget this, on a Friday, the dailies came in, and the dailies played, and then they played my second unit, or my additional shooting dailies, and nobody said a word. And I left, and Vilmos, sort of nodded to me. It was okay, fine. And on Sunday, I got a call. My wife was there with me. And I got a call from Rick Fields, who was Stephen's assistant on that movie. Rick was also Verna Fields' son, the famous editor Verna Fields. And Rick said, Stephen wants to talk to you. Come over to the editing room.
Uh-oh.
So I kind of prepared myself. I said to my wife, I think we're going to be fired. I'm going home. I'm sorry, but this is what's going on. And I went over to the editing room, and Stephen looked up at me they were on the chem, and Stephen looked up at me and said, all right, I want you to go out and do these 5-second unit shots this week. Here's what they are. Bum, 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 bum. And I said, oh, okay.
So I'm not fired.
I wasn't fired. After 4 months of rigging the big stage with 90 feet up, the permanents were 90 feet up. They had like 30 arcs and 40 10Ks up there, and it was about 130 degrees up there, but it was they're building all this stuff. They built the rolling platform with the arcs and 10Ks for the traveling light of the spaceship, and it was huge. At that time it was the largest set ever built indoors for a motion picture. And so they were scheduled to go start shooting on the stage on Monday, and Vilmos said, I can't do that. I haven't even turned a light on. We've just been rigging. That's not lighting. I need to be able to turn the lights on and focus them. And I said, well, no, we can't stop the production to do that. And he said, I must, I insist. And they said, so they thought he would absolutely say no. They said, well, if you give the first unit to Stephen Poster, then you can take your gaffer and go in and do that. And he said, okay. There it was, my first grown-up day on a feature film, which was the evacuation scene, 1,500 extras, trains, a Titan crane, 15 arcs outside. I had never lit with an arc at that point. I'd never been on a Titan crane at that point. And that was my first day as a grown-up DP on a feature film.
Trial by fire.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I bet you have some Ridley Scott stories too.
Well, Ridley was a very fascinating guy. Is a very fascinating guy to watch and to work with and to collaborate with. I came in. I was called in for one shot that had been tried 3 or 4 times. I had no idea, but before I came in, and he never liked what he saw. So by this time, the studio was completely disgusted. And they said, all right, you can go out there and do this shot, but you don't have any lights. We're not sending any lights with you. And all you got's a water truck and a camera truck and some guys to work with. And the shot was Harrison Ford's car, which was called the Spinner, driving through the 2nd Street Tunnel, the White Tunnel. I had no prior knowledge of what had been done before, or the fact that I was, like it was like a test or something. They were just humoring Ridley. And I went out there and I looked at it, and there was that white shiny tile, and it was a very, very hot night, and the water, we'd send the water truck through and it would evaporate about 5 minutes after that. But I had all of the guys' cars that came with us and all the few trucks that we had go to the other side of the tunnel and shine their lights and their brights, their headlights at us. And we even laid in a little bit of smoke and went down and shot it a few times. I took the camera, put it on a sandbag, and shot it, and came back. Went to bed, woke up the next day, and got a call that said, Ridley wants you to come in.
Oh, you're fired again.
There I was. Well, I was a little more secure at that point, but he liked what I had done because everybody was shooting from up here. I was the first guy that put the camera down low and gave it some perspective and had these swirling kind of lights on the white tile. And he liked that, and he kept me there for the rest of the film, which is about another 3 weeks. And we were they were into their very complicated visual effects. They would do 2 or 3 shots a day. And I mean, Jordan Cronenworth was wonderful, a wonderful human being. He was the best of us. He was wonderful, gentle, sweet, and what a talent, what an eye. And he kind of gave me free rein to go out and do whatever Ridley wanted to do. And we would go to other stages where there were sets built and do entire scenes. Like the scene in the Snake Lady Joanna Cassidy's dressing room where he gets beat up. We shot that entire scene. Wow. Because it was just handheld camera and going in there and lighting, and I had my crew and we did that and a number of other little pieces like that were very important. So it was a really great experience for me again for about 3 weeks to get to know Ridley.
We wrap up this episode with a few words from visual effects pioneer Douglas Trumbull. He is a legendary film director, special effects supervisor, and inventor. He contributed to or was responsible for special photographic effects on such classics as 2001: A Space Odyssey, Close Encounters of the Third Kind, to the more recent Tree of Life. He also directed the movies Silent Running and Brainstorm. Today he joins us to share remembrances from the original Blade Runner and some of his thoughts on modern visual effects.
My experience is that most authors who have written a novel that's the basis of a movie are horrified when the movie comes out because it's not anything like what they imagined. And we had a really nice experience on Blade Runner because Philip K. Dick had that same kind of terror and trepidation that they were going to screw up his book. And shortly before he died, he asked if he could see some of what we were doing. And there was a private screening of the special effects for Blade Runner for Philip K. Dick. And he said, "Oh my God, you guys were inside my head. I'm really happy." So that was like the best acknowledgement we've ever had for a movie. One of the new areas of development that I'm particularly interested in is how can we go to any place on the planet and scan it digitally. One of the techniques we're using right now is called LiDAR. It's a laser rangefinder scanning system where you can put a camera down that looks at 360 degrees and creates a sphere of data. Then you can do that in several locations, and then a computer can process that data into a database that is completely photorealistic, right down to every brick and every pebble and every leaf on a tree, and bring that into a studio environment where you can massage it, control it. So we can now do crowd simulations, panic situations, where you can give behavior to synthetic actors or synthetic crowds. And now everybody's wondering, well, what is an actor anymore if you can make Gollum or King Kong based on a performance of an actor with motion capture on facial recognition and things like that? Or what's a set if it's really partly digital, partly built, partly photographic? What's photography if it's created in a computer with computer graphics? So there's a lot of really interesting turmoil and dynamics going on right now, because we're in this transition where we've got one foot in the film world and one foot in this new digital world where we can't even see far enough ahead to know where it's going to go. So I think that's the kind of thing that I'm very interested in as a filmmaker, because I like interacting with actors and directors and sets and props and locations and special effects. Everything in a movie is a special effect.
Thank you for joining us for the Digital Cinema Show. We welcome your input, so please follow us on Vimeo, YouTube, or our Facebook page. If you would like to support our efforts, please also consider joining the Digital Cinema Society. Membership is available to anyone, whether you can afford it or not. It's always free to students. We suggest a $30 annual contribution from those who can afford it, and $100 for a lifetime membership.